The boxes weren't mine, but they were filled with my life. They were cheap cardboard sealed with thick, ugly brown tape and stacked by the door of the house I built with my own 2 hands. My son's wife, Lena, stood with her arms crossed, her smile a thin, tight line that didn't reach her eyes. My son, Leo, stood just behind her, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. How does a father become a stranger in his own home? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. "It's for the best, Arthur," Lena said, her voice smooth as polished glass. She called me Arthur now, had been for months ever since my wife Eleanor passed. It was a small, sharp cruelty, a constant reminder that the word dad was no longer welcome here. The air in the hallway was stale, missing the familiar scent of Eleanor's lemon verbena soap that used to linger near the stairs. Now it just smelled of dust and fresh paint, a pale, lifeless gray they'd chosen to cover the warm yellow Eleanor had loved. I looked past Lena's perfectly styled hair to the mantelpiece over the fireplace. The silver-framed photo of Eleanor and me, taken on our 40th anniversary, was gone. In its place was a sterile, modern vase with a single white orchid. A ghost had been exorcised. I focused on Lena's face, the practiced sympathy in her eyes that felt more like an insult than comfort. Every detail was a small, calculated betrayal, another brick being pulled from the foundation of my world. I tried to catch Leo's eye, but he was staring intently at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder as if studying a fascinating crack in the plaster. "Leo's been so stressed," Lena continued, her tone implying this was all for his benefit, a necessary sacrifice for his well-being. "My parents can help out so much more. They're younger, more able." The word hung in the air, a silent accusation against my 72 years, my slowing steps, my quiet grief that they mistook for uselessness. This wasn't a discussion. It was a verdict that had been reached long before I was summoned to the living room. They had simply waited for the right moment to deliver the sentence. The deed to this house had both our names on it, mine and Eleanor's. After she passed, I'd added Leo's name, thinking it was the right thing to do, a legacy for my only son. I thought I was securing his future, not signing my own eviction notice. "And where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended, the words feeling rough and foreign in my own throat. Lena's smile tightened. "We found a lovely place, a senior community. It's very clean, very safe. You'll make friends." It sounded like a brochure for a high-end kennel. I looked at him, my own son, the boy I taught to ride a bike on this very street, and asked him if he remembered the nights we spent on that porch, planning his future. "What would you have done if your own child refused to even meet your eyes?" He just shifted his weight, his silence a deafening roar of agreement with everything she said. The biggest humiliation came last, delivered with the same casual indifference. "And please don't make it a scene," Lena added, glancing at the front door. "My parents are arriving tomorrow morning. We're having a small welcome party for them in the evening. It would just be awkward if you were still here." A party. They were going to celebrate throwing me out. A welcome party in the home my wife and I had filled with a lifetime of love and memories, a home where every floorboard creaked with a familiar story. That was the moment something inside me didn't just break but hardened. The grief turned to ice. I nodded slowly, a single, deliberate motion. I picked up the small, worn leather satchel I'd brought in with me, the only thing of mine not sealed away in those ugly boxes. I walked toward the door, not looking at the empty SP. I remember the day I installed that front door. Eleanor had wanted one with a small 9-pane window at the top, so the morning sun could spill into the hallway. I spent a week sanding and staining the oak myself, getting the color just right, a deep, warm honey. The brass doorknob felt heavy and cool in my hand then, a promise of permanence. Tonight, it just felt cold. How can a thing you built with love feel like a stranger's possession? The drive was a blur of streetlights smearing across the windshield. I didn't know where I was going, just that I was moving away from the only place that had ever felt like home. I ended up at a roadside motel, the kind with a flickering neon sign that hummed a sad electric tune. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale cigarette smoke, a place built for ghosts and people running from something. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap polyester comforter rough against my trousers. The silence in that room was different from the silence at home. My silence was filled with memories of Eleanor's laughter. This silence was just empty. I placed my worn leather satchel on the bed beside me, the clasp clicking open with a soft, metallic sigh. It didn't hold clothes. It held the truth. Inside, resting on top of a folded shirt, was a thick manila envelope, brittle with age. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. This was my one regret, the one secret I had kept from my son. I thought I was protecting him, giving him a foundation, free of the past's complications. Do you think a parent can ever give too much? I untied the thin string and slid the documents onto the stiff comforter. They weren't just deeds. They were a promise made between two soldiers 40 years ago. The land this house stood on was bought by me and my best friend, Frank, a man I'd served with overseas. We bought it together, a patch of dirt and dreams. When he passed away from a fever he'd picked up in the service years later, he left me his half, but his lawyer, a cautious old man, had insisted on a clause, a reversionary clause. It stated that if I, or my direct blood heir, was ever involuntarily removed from the property, ownership of Frank's original half would immediately transfer to an entity of his family's choosing. It was a fail-safe, a way to protect our legacy from something exactly like this. We never thought it would be my own son to trigger it. I smoothed out the yellowing paper, my finger tracing Frank's confident, looping signature. For years, this document was just a memory, a piece of history I'd locked away. Now it was a weapon. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in a decade. Frank's son, Elias. He wasn't a soldier like his father. He was a shark, one of the most ruthless real estate attorneys in the state. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice exactly as I remembered, calm, sharp, and devoid of emotion. "Elias?" I said, my voice steady. "It's Arthur. The condition, it's been met." There was a pause on the other end, not of surprise but of calculation. "I see," he said finally. "I'll execute the transfer. The buyer has been waiting. He'll be there tomorrow." A wave of relief, cold and sharp, washed over me. It was happening. Justice was in motion. But then Elias spoke again, his voice lowering slightly. "There's a complication, Arthur. The final addendum, the one my father signed in front of the notary clarifying the involuntary clause. It was a separate page. Our records show you were meant to file it with the original deed, but you never did. You told my father you kept it in your safe at the house. Without that page, Lena's lawyers could tie this up in court for years." I felt the air leave my lungs. The safe. The heavy iron safe cemented into the wall of my office closet, right behind a row of Eleanor's old coats. The office that was probably already being cleared out for Lena's father. I had to get back into that house. The reason I never filed that addendum was Eleanor. A week after her funeral, Frank's lawyer had called me, a kind but firm man, reminding me of the outstanding paperwork. I held the document in my hands, its legal jargon a cold comfort in the profound emptiness of our house. Eleanor had always believed in Leo with a fierce, unwavering certainty. She saw only the best in him, a pure and shining version of our son that perhaps only a mother could see. To file that paper felt like a betrayal of her faith, an admission that I believed our son could one day fail us so spectacularly. How could I tell my son that his inheritance was conditional, that his mother's faith in him had been my own undoing? So I folded the single page, slipped it into an envelope, and locked it in the wall safe behind her winter coats. I told myself it was just a formality, a ghost I was laying to rest. I chose faith over foresight. Now sitting in that sterile motel room, the ghost was back, and it was rattling its chains. The silence of the suburbs at 2 a.m. is a living thing, a heavy blanket of quiet that magnifies every sound. I parked my old sedan 3 blocks away and walked, the soles of my shoes whispering on the damp pavement. The house stood dark and still, a hulking shadow against the moonless sky. My house, my prison, my prize. I moved around to the back, to the small window in the laundry room that always had a faulty latch. My hands, usually steady, fumbled with the small pocket knife I used to jimmy it open. Have you ever made a mistake so profound that its shadow stretches across years, waiting for the perfect moment to return? The window slid open with a soft groan. I hoisted myself through, my joints protesting, landing with a muffled thud on the cool linoleum floor. The air inside was thick with the scent of Lena's cloying floral perfume, an alien fragrance that had colonized the space. Every nerve was on fire. I moved through the darkness of my own home like a thief, my hand trailing along the wall for guidance. I knew every inch of this place, every creak in the floorboards. I avoided the 5th step on the main staircase, the one that always groaned, my breath held tight in my chest. Upstairs, the door to my old office was closed. I turned the knob with agonizing slowness. Inside, the room was a disaster. Books had been swept from shelves, my old desk drawers were pulled out and emptied onto the floor. They hadn't just moved me out. They had ransacked my life, searching for anything of value. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I went to the closet, pushing aside the plastic-wrapped shapes that must have been Lena's winter clothes. The familiar scent of cedar and mothballs, the ghost of Eleanor's presence, was gone. My fingers found the edge of the small framed painting of a seascape that hid the safe. It swung aside silently. The cold steel of the dial felt like a shock to my fingertips. Left to 27, right to 54, left to 18. The combination was Eleanor's birthday. A soft thud echoed in the small space as the tumblers aligned. I pulled the heavy door open, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside, searching for the manila envelope. But it wasn't there. The safe was empty. No, not empty. My beam caught something small, something that didn't belong. It was a small, dark blue velvet jewelry box, the kind a ring comes in. My blood went cold. It was the box I had given Eleanor's engagement ring to her in 50 years ago. I hadn't seen it in decades. With a trembling hand, I reached in and picked it up. It felt impossibly light. I opened it. Inside, nestled on the worn black velvet, was Eleanor's wedding ring. And underneath it, a small, folded note, its handwriting delicate, familiar, and utterly impossible. The handwriting was hers. There was no mistaking the elegant, slightly slanted loop of the E in Eleanor, or the way she pressed down hard on the final letter of a word, as if to anchor her thoughts to the page. My wife has been gone for over a year, so who wrote this note and put it in my safe? My mind rejected it instantly. A forgery, a cruel, elaborate trick orchestrated by Lena to break what was left of my spirit. But the closer I looked, the more impossible that became. The paper was Eleanor's preferred stationery, a thick, creamy stock she ordered from a small shop in the city. The ink was the same faded peacock blue she always used. I could see the ghost of her hand in every curve, could almost feel the warmth of her presence as she wrote it. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the single small sheet. The light from my phone cast long, dancing shadows across the ransacked office as I read the words that would shatter and rebuild my world in the same breath. My dearest Arthur, it began. If you are reading this, then the day I feared has come, and I am so very sorry. I saw the weakness in him, my love. The way he bent to the will of others. I saw it, and I prayed I was wrong. The words were a punch to the gut. She knew. Eleanor, who had defended Leo at every turn, who had insisted on his inherent goodness, had seen this coming. She had carried this secret dread alone. What do you do when you realize the person you trusted most was hiding a truth to protect you from your own heart? The note continued. Your faith is in our son, but my faith has always been in you. I could not let that document be the thing that destroyed our family from within. So I took it. He would have found it. She would have made him look. It is not here. A cold dread washed over me, replaced by a surge of desperate, frantic hope. It wasn't gone. It was moved. Don't look for it in this house, Arthur. It is not a place for our secrets anymore. Look where we first danced under the stars. It is safe there. Please, be the man I always knew you were. Stronger than your grief, stronger than his betrayal. All my love, always. Your Eleanor. Where we first danced under the stars. The words echoed in my mind, a riddle wrapped in a memory. It wasn't a place. It was a thing. The old rosewood music box I had given her on our first anniversary. It had a painted lid showing a couple dancing under a starry sky, and when you opened it, it played our song. After her diagnosis, she'd given it back to me. You keep the stars for me now, she'd whispered. It was in my storage unit, the one I'd rented after her passing to hold the things I couldn't bear to part with, but couldn't bear to see every day. The document was safe. The proof was safe. A sob, sharp and ragged, escaped my throat. It was a sound of grief, but also of profound, earth-shattering relief. She had seen the storm coming and had built me an ark. I folded the note, clutching it in my hand like a holy relic, my mind already racing. I had to get to the storage unit before Elias's office opened, before the party started, before Lena and Leo could raise any legal shields. I turned to leave, my movements now filled with a purpose I hadn't felt in a year. And that's when I heard it. A key sliding into the front door lock downstairs. A soft metallic click that echoed through the silent house. Then, the unmistakable sound of the front door swinging open and a light flicking on in the hall below. He didn't call out. He didn't shout my name or demand to know who was there. I heard only the soft, deliberate footsteps of one person, moving not with the urgency of someone confronting an intruder, but with the weary tread of someone returning to a place of unhappiness. How can the sound of your own son's approach fill you with more dread than the thought of a stranger? A blade of yellow light sliced under the office door, pinning me in place. My body went rigid, every muscle screaming to run, to hide, but I was frozen, a statue in the mausoleum of my own memories. The note from Eleanor was a hot coal in my hand. I shoved it deep into my pocket just as the office door swung open. It was Leo. He stood silhouetted against the bright hallway light, his shoulders slumped. He looked older than he had that afternoon, his face pale and drawn. He wasn't holding a weapon, just his car keys, which he still gripped as if he'd forgotten to let them go. His eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom. Then they found me, standing by the open safe. Shock flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a dull, exhausted anger. Dad? What are you doing here? You can't be here. His voice was a harsh whisper laced with panic. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of Lena finding me here. I forgot something, I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. The lie came easily, a thin shield against the storm I knew was coming. Something of your mother's. He took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping over the overturned drawers, the books scattered on the floor. A flicker of shame, or perhaps just irritation, crossed his face. Lena was just making space, he mumbled, not looking at me. She gets carried away. He was blaming her. Just like Eleanor had predicted, he was bending, shifting responsibility. Do you think he even believed his own excuses? For the first time I saw him not as my son, but as the weak man my wife had tried to protect me from. The pity I felt was quickly consumed by a cold, hard anger. Making space, I repeated, my voice low. This wasn't making space, Leo. This was a violation. You were looking for something. He finally met my eyes and I saw the cornered animal in them. We were looking for the original deed paperwork, he admitted, his voice cracking. Lena's father. His lawyer said it would be cleaner if we had all the copies. Cleaner. The word was so sterile, so devoid of emotion. They weren't just taking my home, they were sanitizing my history, wiping away the fingerprints of my life with Eleanor. He had no idea that the real power wasn't in this house, but in my pocket, resting against my thigh. I took a step toward him, out of the shadows and into the sliver of light from the hallway. I wanted him to see my face. Your mother would be so ashamed of you, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I expected him to rage, to defend himself, to shout. Instead, his face crumpled, not in remorse, but in a bitter, resentful frustration. He looked like a little boy about to throw a tantrum. Don't, he snapped, his voice shaking. Don't you dare use her against me. You have no idea what it's been like. You've been wandering around this house like a ghost for a year, dragging her memory through every room. We need to move on. And then came the final betrayal, the words that would sever the last, thinnest thread of connection between us. He took another step, his eyes burning with a desperate, cruel fire. She would have wanted this, he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Toward the end, she told me she was tired. She was tired of this big house. She was tired of taking care of you. His words didn't just hurt, they were a fire, burning away the last vestiges of the father I thought I was and the son I thought I had. She was tired of taking care of you. That was the true betrayal, the one that severed everything. He was using my wife's memory, the purest thing in my life, as a weapon to justify his own greed. In that moment, standing in the ruins of my office, I felt a profound and terrible calm settle over me. The grief didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something solid and sharp. I looked at my son, at his face twisted with a selfish, desperate anger, and I saw a stranger. How do you mourn a child who is still standing right in front of you? I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned and walked out of the office, down the stairs, making sure to step on the fifth one, letting it groan its protest into the silence, and out the front door I had built. I didn't look back. The cold night air was a shock, but a welcome one. It cleared my head. I didn't drive to the motel. I drove across town toward the industrial park where rows of identical corrugated steel doors stood like silent soldiers guarding the forgotten pieces of people's lives. My storage unit was number 218. The heavy door rattled upward, revealing a small 10 by 10 space stacked with furniture shrouded in white sheets, like sleeping giants. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and the faint, lingering scent of Eleanor's cedar chest. I knew exactly where it was. Tucked inside an old steamer trunk, beneath a pile of her photo albums, was the rosewood music box. Its polished surface was cool to the touch. I ran my thumb over the painted lid, over the tiny couple dancing under an impossible number of stars. With a click, I opened it. The delicate, tinny notes of our song, Stardust, filled the silence. And there, nestled in the red velvet lining where her jewelry used to be, was a folded document, the addendum. Eleanor had saved me. I met Elias at a 24-hour diner that smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. He was sitting in a corner booth, a folder on the table in front of him. He looked at the addendum without a word, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded, slid it into his own file, and closed it. The buyer is a foundation, he said, his voice low and precise. Specifically, a housing initiative for homeless veterans that my father was a patron of. When the reversionary clause is triggered, Frank's half share of the property, combined with your intent to sell, gives the foundation controlling interest. They can move to liquidate or occupy immediately. The transfer is legally ironclad. He paused, looking at me over the rim of his coffee cup. The representative is waiting in my car. Are you ready, Arthur? Was it revenge I wanted, or was it just balance? I thought of Lena's smug smile, of Leo's weak excuses, of their laughter echoing in a home built on a foundation of love they had desecrated. Yes, I was ready. The party was in full swing. We could hear the music from the curb, a generic, thumping beat that felt alien to the quiet street. Laughter spilled from the open windows, a sound of carefree celebration. We walked up the path, 3 men in dark coats moving toward the light. I pushed open the front door. The scene was exactly as I had pictured. Lena was holding a glass of champagne, her parents on either side of her, all of them laughing at something her father had said. Leo was by the fireplace, talking to a couple I didn't recognize, a strained but social smile plastered on his face. He looked up first. His smile didn't just vanish, it shattered. His face went slack, the color draining from it as he saw me, then Elias, then the calm, well-dressed man standing beside us. The music seemed to stutter. Conversations faltered. One by one, heads turned. The warmth and noise in the room evaporated, leaving behind a cold, ringing silence. Lena's champagne glass tilted in her hand, a single drop spilling onto the hardwood floor. Her perfect smile froze, then crumbled into a mask of confusion and fury. "Arthur," she hissed, her voice cutting through the quiet. "What is the meaning of this? You were told not to come back." I didn't speak. I let Elias do that. He stepped forward, his presence filling the room with an authority that could not be challenged. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "My name is Elias Vance. I am the legal representative for the estate of Frank Gable. I am here to inform you that as of 9:27 this morning, the reversionary clause on this property's deed has been triggered by the involuntary removal of its primary resident, Arthur Mills." A ripple of confusion went through Lena's parents. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. That's ridiculous," Lena stammered, trying to regain her footing. "This is our house." "It is not," Elias said flatly. He opened his folder. "This document, an addendum to the original deed, specifies the conditions. This gentleman," he said, gesturing to the man beside him, "is Mr. Clark from the Veterans Homestead Foundation. As of this morning, they are the majority owners of this property. You are, I believe the appropriate term is, trespassing." He looked directly at Lena, his eyes like chips of ice. "They've asked me to deliver this. It's a notice to vacate. You have 48 hours. The world stopped. Lena's face was a grotesque canvas of shock, rage, and disbelief. Her father started to bluster about lawyers, but the certainty in Elias's voice had already cut him off at the knees. Leo simply stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the full weight of his colossal mistake crashing down on him. I didn't say a word to them. I walked past their stunned faces, through the crowd of silent guests, and went to the hallway closet. I reached inside and pulled out the silver-framed photograph of Eleanor and me, the one they had hidden away. I wiped a smudge of dust from the glass with my thumb, my gaze fixed on her smiling face. Then, clutching the photo, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them to the deafening silence and the ruins of their greed. They put my life into cardboard boxes, believing they could discard my history as easily as old junk. But a home isn't just walls and a roof. It's a fortress built of trust and memory. The moment you betray that trust, you haven't just lost a house. You've made yourself homeless, no matter where you sleep. What do you believe is the most important foundation for a family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For a week, I lived with the ghost of a victory. I'd moved into a small, clean apartment with white walls and a window that overlooked a quiet park. The silence here was different from the motel's emptiness and the house's oppressive quiet. It was a neutral silence, a blank canvas. On the small kitchen table, propped up against a sugar bowl, was the silver-framed photo of Eleanor. I would sit and drink my morning coffee, looking at her smile, and the triumph I felt that night at the party would curdle into something else, something heavier. Justice is a clean, sharp word, but the reality of it is messy. Had I honored her, or had I just become a different kind of destroyer? The knock on my door was so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. It came again, a hesitant, shuffling tap. not the sound of a visitor, but of a supplicant. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Leo stood in the hallway, looking like a ship that had been dashed against the rocks. His clothes were rumpled, there were dark circles under his eyes, and the arrogant confidence he'd worn like a suit of armor was gone, leaving only a hollowed-out man. He was holding a single, sad-looking cardboard box. "Dad," he said, his voice a dry rasp. Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked into the small living room and stood awkwardly in the center, as if he were afraid to touch anything. He placed the box on the floor. "These were in the back of my car," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Some of Mom's old gardening journals. I thought you'd want them." It wasn't an olive branch. It was a white flag. A desperate, final gesture from a man with no moves left to make. I didn't thank him. I just waited. "Lena's gone," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She left the day after, took her parents and went back to her sister's. She said I was weak, that I'd let you ruin everything. She was right." He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a pathetic, self-pitying grief. "I lost everything, Dad. The house, her, the money her parents had invested in my business. It's all gone." He was asking for absolution. He was crying over the consequences, not the crime. Can a bond that has been so completely broken ever truly be mended? I thought of Eleanor's note, of her clear-eyed assessment of the son she adored. I saw the weakness in him, my love. She hadn't seen a monster. She had seen a boy who would forever be too easily led, too hungry for the approval of others, too weak to stand for what was right when it was hard. My anger was gone, burned away in the fire of that final confrontation. All that was left was a vast, aching pity. "There is nothing for you here, Leo," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "The house is gone. What you did can't be undone. But I'm your son," he whispered, the words a final, desperate plea. "Yes," I said, looking from his broken face to the smiling one in the photograph. "You are. And your mother loved you, but she would not have mistaken love for a license to be cruel. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I walked to my coat, took out my wallet, and placed a few $100s on the table next to Eleanor's picture. "This is for a decent hotel. Get a meal, get some sleep, and figure out how to be a man your mother would recognize. That's all I have left to give you." He stared at the money, then at me, and a flicker of the old resentment flared in his eyes before it was extinguished by despair. He nodded, a small jerky motion, turned, and walked out of my life. A month later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I drove down my old street. I didn't know why, but I felt pulled there one last time. As I neared the house, I saw that the pale, lifeless gray had been painted over. It was a warm, welcoming cream color now. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and in the garden where Eleanor's roses used to be, 2 men in army surplus jackets were building a new raised flower bed. A wheelchair ramp now led up to the front porch where an American flag fluttered in the breeze. Mr. Clark was on the porch talking with a woman I didn't know. He saw my car and raised a hand in a slow, respectful wave. I waved back and kept driving. The house wasn't a place of ghosts for me anymore. It was alive again, breathing with a new purpose, a purpose born from my promise to Frank and Eleanor's unwavering faith in me. My son's betrayal had been a poison, but my wife's love had been the antidote. I finally understood that revenge isn't about watching your enemies fall. It's about having the strength to stand up, turn your back on the wreckage, and find a new way to build. Sometimes, the only way to truly reclaim your home is to let it go. If you were in my shoes, could you have ever forgiven him? Share your honest answer in the comments.